recorded now.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, so Paul, do you want to kick off with
Sure.
formalities?
Emergency exits for those who are here, please use the stairs or the elevator that you came from, or to directly opposite us is a secondary exit. Don't forget there's scaffolding out front. It is accessible, but just note that that's there. If you're at home, look for the door nearest to where you're sitting.
Thank you. And yeah, everyone's familiar with the Zoom here.
There
So,
he is.
perfect.
Forget about my message.
Hey, Andrew, welcome.
Somehow I did every light on person.
Oh, man, I got them all green, so probably left at the same time. All right, so any changes to the agenda that anyone wants to propose? I think we've got a fairly focused agenda today.
I had sent out a couple of suggestions for the agenda.
Oh, yes, thank you. And I didn't write them down. Can you share them with the
Yeah,
group?
so one is the schedule and the deliverables for phase one. I had brought this up at the last meeting, we didn't get a chance to review. And then I would also like us to kind of check in on the whole equity issue, what we are going to do. I haven't heard much lately, so.
Yep.
Okay.
Right, I've forgotten CCMPC is not here today.
Yeah, they're working on the content still, right?
I remember that now, that they were gonna skip
So they're
this one.
working on the first actual draft of the plan. So I wanted to make sure that they're getting some time to work on that and not be in the sort of treadmill of preparing for a meeting when that's a deliverable that I know everybody is really focused on. So
Actually, I saw an agenda today on another webinar about heat pumps.
Yeah, I had a conflict there, watching a webinar about energy equity. So let's put those, just looking at the schedule. So we have a topic on public outreach that probably meshes well with the schedule conversation, Srini. We can maybe expand that. Are we confident enough about the timing that we can just tackle equity after that, or are we concerned that, do we need to move possible task force recommendations on new construction, thermal and build? That's the discussion on the presentation that you gave though, right, Andrew? Yeah, I think we should be able to get through everything, Srini, if you're comfortable. I hate to always put equity at the end, but
Yeah, I just, this is supposed to be a short meeting to begin with, right?
right, right. Yeah, no, it's an hour and a half or less on here. I mean, we can start with the equity before the schedule parts maybe, and then that'll maybe provide some framing for the schedule to see if we've then addressed the equity concerns as we brought them up. Let's do that. Anyone else? There's someone in the waiting room, Paul. I don't, that's Bill, I think. Okay, anything from the public? Marcy, Roseanne?
Yes, I do have one thing I want to raise, which I don't think you have discussed. And it's actually something that which Andrew just mentioned about traffic lights. Back in 2012, I had asked the city whether or not we could do something in South Burlington to adjust our traffic lights to at least be a bit similar to how Burlington does it. And by that I meant when you are in Burlington after, like, I think it's like 9 o'clock or so, a lot of the lights, even on main thoroughfares, go to flashing. And we came back from the Flynn or something, and I was reminded of that. We're on, Pine Street and Battery, and those lights are flashing. We get to South Burlington, and we stop at a red light when there is nothing in sight. That's very inefficient. The car is running if you have a gas powered car, but it causes, more energy usage to stop and to start when there's no need for it at certain parts of, when traffic has really gone down. So, I'm raising it with this and with this climate action task force as something to maybe mention that that's a way to save energy, and it just is a timer kind of thing. And the city right next to us has been doing it for a decade. So
So South Burlington's lights only start flashing at 11.
they do, well, if they even flash. I mean, I used to come home from city council meetings at 11 and they still turned red. So I don't know. But especially on roads that are not major, I'm not going to say this for Shelburne or for Williston Road, but I mean, Spear and Dorset and Heinsberg, and some of those little traveled roads, especially after an hour, you're forcing people to stop their car, to idle, to accelerate. All of that takes fossil fuels if you have a gas powered car, also causing frustration and time delays and stuff. So I would think with the new technology, there might be something that the committee might be willing to mention.
Yeah, so noted, and I think sort of broader potential topic of like traffic light optimization and how can we reduce idling. There might be other technologies out there that are less.
There are, but I know
So-
they're expensive. Yeah.
I suspect ideas or concepts like these, there will be plenty of them when you engage with the public.
Yep.
So there's got to be a way of at least capturing them and acknowledging them and see whether it gets into the action plan or
Yeah.
not.
I mean,
No,
I constantly, people were saying, why can't they time the lights on Dorset Street?
Yeah.
Why do you have to stop when there's nobody in the cross? And that's been on the budget. That's been budgeted for quite a long time, and it just keeps, I don't know why it keeps being delayed. but
Well,
it-
Dorset Street.
it
the
has been
lights
budgeted for.
Are sequenced if you're going in the right direction. But this is what, we don't have to wait for this. We can ask the city council or the public works department to do it right now. Start, make the lights flash from 10 o'clock on or 9 o'clock on.
Well, it's a contract. You have to, I think they need, I guess they have to purchase equipment too to do that, don't they?
Right, well, I think the larger point of gathering this feedback, and I would say, whether it does or doesn't make it into the plan, there are gonna be a lot of really good ideas that may be really big ideas or really small ideas, and they should be shared. In this one, certainly, we can relay this information. I know that Dorset Street in particular is a very complicated one. There is a multi-layered project that has been years in the making that involves federal money about replacing mastheads, replacing technology, agreements about which technology is appropriate, which is experimental for grants. It's very laborious, but it is continuing forward.
So that may be for sequencing, right?
Well, for sequencing hardware, the hardware is
we
20+
already
years
have
old,
the-
so there's limited amounts of programming that can happen with it.
We already have the wherewithal to have the lights flash. It's just a question of changing the time.
Yeah, I mean,
Sharing what I know at
guess-
this point.
I guess what I would suggest is that we made a decision about the natural gas ordinance, that it was such a high priority in terms of the amount of carbon in the overall portfolio, that it was worth sort of
I'll take
accelerating
care of this.
and putting a
I'll
rush
try and
on it.
take care of this with Paul's help to direct me to who I should talk to.
Well, I guess what I'm suggesting is you're gonna get a lot of really good ideas, and if they go one at a time
That's-
places,
that's
it's
where I was
not
go-
gonna
that's
be,
where I was going.
it's not gonna
That's-
be a
No,
an
no, that's
organized sense.
exactly where I was going, Paul, is I think we had an accelerated measure or two
Okay.
for good reasons. I think the rest of them we should try to batch up and go through the process. Because otherwise, I think we'll erode the impact on the council of.
Can't
having
agree
these
with you at all, but
things.
I defer.
Okay, thank you. But I just have to tell you, this was raised 10 years ago. And Justin Rabideau said, yeah, we're working on it. So it's been 10 years. So just
I don't see.
not a new idea,
Gonna get on with.
Can I suggest I propose we leave this subject now?
Yeah, agree.
Okay, thank you for the suggestion, Roseanne. We'll capture it for sure. Anyone else from the public have a comment before we start the rest of the agenda?
Thanks, Ethan. I just wanted to support Roseanne. Given that this is a transportation issue and that is one of our biggest emissions, I think it is important to have it be on a priority list someplace. Thank you.
Noted. Thanks, Marcy. Anyone else?
Before we kick off the forward, I just want to mention, I finally read this really good paper. I think, Paul, did you distribute this thing?
Yes, zoning practice.
It's really good. I don't know if others have read it, but there were a couple of ideas in here that jumped out at me that I think we should consider putting in our actions. I know we've talked
I
about
may
it.
have provided this to the planning commission and maybe not to the whole climate group, but I'm happy to provide it
Oh,
to the whole climate group. Because I
yeah,
think
there was-
Kelsey handed it out at one of the meetings.
Okay, that's where I got it. Okay, yeah, folks should read this. I mean, one is Boulder requires all new development to orient units to maximize solar access. I mean, it's like a no-brainer, right? We should do that.
So background for those at home, I get a subscription to a thrilling magazine called Zoning Practice. But it actually is really good. It's a monthly publication. They pick a specific topic each month, every year. And they do a dive into what is the most innovative practice happening in that field across the country. And it's specifically about zoning and regulations. So one month, I think I provided one that was about industrial areas. And so it's, completely separate topic. This one was about climate and climate change. So I'd be happy to share that
It was
around.
about, yeah, writing regulations to reduce carbon emissions. And the whole paper was about that. It was great. And there's another one, an ordinance that you can't, remove trees. Except if you replace them. We have something like that either, which makes no
I
sense.
think that's in our spreadsheet somewhere.
I don't think that precisely is an ordinance.
It should be taken up by the planning commission.
Exactly. It should be.
Should be.
Yes.
All sorts of suggested things.
I
that should be
completely
taken up
agree
by
with
the
that,
planning
but,
commission.
an effective way to put that on the planning commission agenda is to make it a climate action thing. I mean, separately, obviously, Michael Laurie, but it's a good avenue for that. So,
Yeah, so I think, I think all this points to the need to have an ongoing process for continuing to capture new
Yes.
ideas and keep them flowing in, because I'm sure that even after the plan is quote unquote finalized in September, we're still gonna get ideas in, so we're gonna want to be able to continue processing them, and we don't really have a plan for that yet, so that's something we should think about. But I don't think we need to tackle it tonight. We can just make a queue for these somewhere and not lose them.
well, I think we should do better than that. I mean, I guess I would suggest that, the actions are still draft. We just
We'll
send these to,
we voted to finalize the actions to the point where the CCRPC could start drawing up the plan, and if we're constantly throwing new things at them, I think it's gonna be very difficult for them to actually get them formatted out there. Are we gonna keep adding things on continuously right up until it goes to publication?
I don't know if continuous thread of publication, but I mean, if there are good ideas like the lights and I think these, I wouldn't think it's too late to add actions.
Why
Or,
don't we, why don't we?
important actions.
Sorry, why don't we set an expectation of a specific date? Whatever new ideas come up between now and that date, we add it all together as a one-time exercise.
Okay, yeah.
Based on whatever we get from public engagement, whatever, just set an expectation that we're gonna have these interaction sessions. Whatever comes up, we'll park it in the list and we'll do a one-time exercise of updating based on what we agree on.
Paul, do we have expectations in the scope about an update that's already coming up? Has that date already been set with the CCRPC to have?
So the objective would be that you are receiving, well, we can talk about the schedule. Why don't we talk about when we talk about the schedule in a few
Okay.
minutes? Is that okay?
Yep.
For Srini, so whenever you're ready, we can do that.
Okay. All right, so unless there's anything else, let's move on to communicating possible task force recommendations. So Andrew, I think this is a debrief from something you've already mentioned, or is this, I'm sorry, Paul, I think I'm miswiring, whether this was, these are comments on Andrew's slides, right, that were
Right, so
developed?
this is, at the last meeting, the task force asked Andrew, or Andrew volunteered, and the task force agreed to put together some slides that would be a demonstration and indication of what could go to council. So I think this was, I don't know if you wanted to just receive them, or if you'd like for Andrew to walk through it a little bit for you, but this is the results of that, and then the discussion about what do you want to do from here? Do you want to group everything and provide it? Do you want to provide, do you want to recommend that this go as a presentation to council as its own? I think that was the discussion to follow.
So one question I have before we like sort of dive into the content of the discussion, it might be sort of useful to think about like, or ask what the context is that we think we would ask for. Are we thinking that this is a 15-minute presentation with feedback from the council? Is this a special session that we want to invite the council to have an hour-long conversation with us? Did you have something in mind, Andrew, or Paul, was there?
It would be at a council meeting and on an
Yes.
agenda scheduled by the city manager and the city chair.
I'd like to get on the very next council meeting and take, I don't know, a half hour and ask them to adopt this ordinance.
So how many of the city councilors were at the joint meeting last week?
At the steering committee?
No,
With the city, with the school,
the
right?
school, was it the school board and the city council?
Yeah,
Yes.
That's what I thought. So we're,
That was,
Three
they
city
were,
councils.
no, they were all there, I believe.
I didn't-
Oh,
No, not all.
yes, they were all there.
yeah.
One was
No, so
remote
was-
and the others were.
Yeah.
So this is-
so this is not going to be new to them.
Well,
I don't
but,
think they've
but
heard
the,
this. They haven't heard
but
this.
the topic at that meeting was about the school, bringing the school into the conversation.
Ah,
So that was the conversation that I queued up was, hey, we're doing this climate action
Okay.
plan. The school is really important. Why don't you join us and get involved and be an important player in this?
But having said that, this won't be new, because Helen's already raised it with the council at the last meeting, as an update that she expects we're gonna be coming to ask them to do this, so they already know it's coming.
So I have a question. So what was presented to the city council and the school representatives at the meeting?
It was a very high level, here's where the task force came from. We've been working as a task force. We're now in the draft phase. We're gonna go out to public engagement next. Here are some of the high level things. So I did mention that, you know, an ordinance and a charter change were on our short list along with, you know, vehicle electrification and, you know, transportation land use issues. So I sort of hit the sort of high level, like here's a top couple things that we're
They were-
prioritizing.
Yeah.
And then I tried to get pretty quickly to, the school's really important, you're a big emitter and you teach our students. How do you want to join in on this? And I'd say it was positively received, but we didn't get any concrete, like, yes, we're gonna commit to do X or,
Nor was there an ask. It was a presentation. There was no
right,
action asked of them, and this is a joint meeting, so this, neither board can act.
right.
at a-
There was an ask, quite an emotional one. I asked the school board to think about adding to the curriculum a significant curriculum item to teach students, or to prepare students for climate change. Because a lot of kids are
Thank you
terrified.
for doing that, Michael. It's
Terrified
really
of what's
important.
coming. They need to know what's coming and they need to be prepared how to handle it, because they're gonna have to change their lifestyles. They're gonna have to make sacrifices that we haven't had to. My main objective in asking for them is to allay some of this fear and hopelessness that young people are feeling today.
so that was a school board.
Yeah.
And what I read in the other paper is that it looks like the head of curriculum may be the superintendent for this coming year.
Who's not gonna be there?
No, but the person who would be next in line to
Yeah.
take over that was the head of curriculum. You know, so she may very well be the superintendent next year. And if she wasn't in the room,
What's
that's
her name?
unfortunate. I don't know.
Well, David Young was in the room and he's obviously gonna
Yeah,
pass these things along. And then we.
Well, he may not, but.
Ethan and I briefly referred to things like, their weatherization opportunities for school buildings, which would make quite a big difference, and their opportunities for reduction of vehicle miles traveled to get more kids to go on the school bus, that sort of thing. That was well received, I think. Ethan's presentation was well received.
Ethan, do you have the presentation part somewhere or?
Do. It's I talked. I didn't show slides. I wanted to have a
Yeah,
conversation.
that's why I was trying to figure out what context has been set.
No,
to
I
the
mean,
city
I
council.
am happy to share my notes if you want to know how I went through it, but I didn't do a
Well,
presentation.
I
specifically.
believe in context setting with
Yeah,
specific details.
I
So,
provided details. I just
yeah,
didn't go show
I'm
the
just,
slides.
I'm just saying that for a new audience like this, on a tough topic like this, you need to spend a lot of time. Helen said, I remember this a couple of times, we have to treat the city council like kindergarten audience. You have to like be very basic, very deliberate with them in raising the issue. So I was just curious what content was specifically shared and what they left with. So
Sounds like it was really a first step,
first up, yeah.
but what is the next step is, I guess, my question. Is there a scheduled next round?
Yeah.
with the schools- with the
We
school
don't
board?
have one yet. We should have one. And the question that I didn't get a chance to answer, unfortunately, the meeting was running behind schedule. And so by the time we got done with it, we were 20 minutes past time and everyone was.
Right, well,
You know, out of
and
there,
again, a reminder, this was the steering committee, which is not the school board meeting.
Right.
It is the two of them together, so it's not a time when either board decides what they individually are gonna do. It's really just about coordination between them, so this really was an informational meeting.
Mhm.
It would be appropriate to follow up with the school board and the new superintendent, understanding that they're going through a transition literally this week. About when to talk with them directly at some future time, but this would not have been the time to try to schedule because this wasn't.
Right.
It wasn't either board, it was a specific charter setup joint steering committee.
Speaking about presentations though, I gave with Michael's help a presentation to the planning commission about our work. I did have a deck, which I'm happy to share, and I'll just send it around to folks right now, so folks have that.
I guess going back to Ethan's comment, the key question is what context setting you need to do with the city council, even before you get into the specific topic of electrification and the ordinance, about the climate change task force, the overall plan, why we need to focus on this. I think that's the key question here.
I think that will be answered if we go through the deck.
And most councillors, they pretty well know what's coming. And they know about what Burlington has done because it's been in the press a lot.
Okay.
So I don't know if we need to set the context. I think they know a little more than we think they do.
Notwithstanding, I agree, it's important to set context.
I mean, I don't have the background, so I don't want to make assumptions. So you test the audience by how they engage on specific issues. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the one thought I have going into that is that hopefully we don't have to start at the very, very beginning. I know that, it is helpful to be somewhat elementary, but the council did unanimously pass the resolution saying that they wanted us to do this and it's important. So of all the audiences in town, I would hope that we don't have to convince them from scratch. That might be naive of me to believe that, but
Point to set the ground again for them.
Yeah, well, and I guess I would remind that, right, the council is your principal audience, but
Public is the audience
the
too.
public and all those at home
Yeah.
are often who will be receiving the audience because, step one is council has to decide if they want to be considering action. Step two is council's going to be hearing from everybody.
You
And
need
so
to set the
for
stage.
everybody to have. So I guess, to the agenda topic here, do you want Andrew to go sort of quickly through the slides or do you just want to speak about the slides? I'm happy to put them up on the screen.
I mean, are folks prepared to speak about them or would it be helpful to have them up on the screen?
I have a few comments and suggestions, so I'm happy to share them. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So
So we're gonna put 'em up?
I guess, why don't you put them up on the screen so we can, that way everyone can see, we'll follow along.
Just one moment.
I mean, I suppose that everybody else has got some suggestions and comments, but I
Well,
just
that's,
have.
that's the purpose of this meeting.
Sit over there, otherwise I can't see what's going on.
You want me to get the plug for you, Michael?
Okay.
Go ahead. So
Okay. You want me to read it through? Do folks want to read it and comment?
Well, I mean, we've had this, it was in our packet, so
Right.
I think we've all read it.
Good, okay.
Somebody saying something?
Was that someone on the,
I think that was Darrell saying correct. She did also read it.
I think we decided several meetings ago that we weren't going to spend our meeting time reading materials that were sent to us in the packet.
Yeah.
good
Okay.
point. Okay, so let's just jump in and comment on it. Srini, you've got.
Yeah,
some-
so I just want to, these are some clarifications and so on the first, I'm just tying some comments to the first slide to the recommendations, which is the last slide. So in this slide, it says, as such, while our work is ongoing, we are all of the view that City Council should immediately pass an ordinance similar to the ordinance passed by our neighboring city of Burlington. So I read that and then I go to the recommendations page. It says, we recommend that South Burlington adopt as soon as possible an ordinance requiring that with immediate effect. So I can read a lot into it. So I just want to, I'm just looking for consistency on what the message is.
I intended those to be synonyms, but we can certainly make the
No,
words,
it's not.
we can make the
So-
words exactly the same.
So the first one says, we are gonna pass an ordinance immediately, right?
The sense of this task force in previous meetings was do it now, get the city council to do it now. So whichever word.
I think as soon as
So I'll
possible.
just say-
As soon as possible, I think functionally is as good
Yeah,
as
I'm-
you can
I'm
do.
just-
I mean, I
Yeah.
intended it
Nothing
to be,
happens
I'll
immediately.
change the recommendation to immediately adopt. So. Yeah,
Well,
okay.
Well, it's as soon as possible.
I mean,
Well,
So
basically.
passing an ordinance and adopting, and as soon as possible, they all have different meanings.
Okay.
So I'm just asking for clarification here.
can I ask, because I mean, that is an important point. If
Yeah.
the intention is actually immediately, they are in session at the moment that we'll be giving this presentation. Are we going to put language in front of them that's been vetted by the lawyer that we actually are hoping that they'll vote on? That's how I would read immediately, is that we would hand them language and say, please vote on this now. Is that,
That would be step 2, I think, after this.
Well, so as a practical matter, council is going to be presented with a proposal and an idea. They will then need to task the city manager with preparing an ordinance that match, it may be similar to Burlington's, but it won't be exactly the same. We're a different municipality with different charter requirements. With looking at what the resources are, proposing to council and understanding what the cost implications are, there will be some time associated with that. Even if it's, so, I think maybe the ask is to initiate it immediately, but there won't be an action to pass it that night. It needs to be.
So just a background,
Yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
I'm expecting the action would be to agree to start this process.
Why don't I word it to say immediately agree to pass? How about that?
I don't think council works that way, though.
Yeah.
What would folks like to say?
I'd say as soon as
I
possible.
think as soon as possible works,
Okay.
fine.
Should,
As soon as
as soon as
possible, yeah, I guess.
possible.
Yeah.
pass.
Let's not demand
No,
they
yeah, I'm
do
okay with that,
something
I
they
think.
can't, they
As soon-
functionally
that's
can't
fine.
do.
Yeah, and agree in the future.
Yeah, I think we are pushing for a best practice. We just don't know what it takes to
Yeah, that's fine.
get to the best practice, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. And then, there's a lot of background stuff here. My general comment is, the background stuff, there's tons of materials out there. So maybe to keep it somewhat specific to Vermont, maybe use material that is relevant
This is taken from the Vermont Global Warming Solutions page. This is a summary of what's in the Vermont state website.
Which slide is that?
Second slide.
Second slide? Okay, yeah, that's fine. No, I was just referring to I was just making a general comment that things that they are already familiar with. So this is the climate assessment, right? So this is the second page, local climate change impacts. That's from the Vermont climate assessment page. It's just an exact reproduction of that. So, okay. The next page is the same as well.
I think it's important, the next page is global. And I think it's really important to frame the local impacts with the global impacts.
Okay.
Because the global impacts are, as we all know, more threatening and dire, and Vermont's not an island. And I think it's important to frame it that way.
And within the framing, I think one thing that's important, and this was brought very much to mind by a young lady from Viborg who came around my house. And I thought it was very opportune because I got to ask her a question. I said, "You've talked to a lot of people so far, around South Burlington." She said, "Yes, I have." I said, "So what is their general attitude about the effect of climate change in Vermont?" And she said, predominantly, they think it's not going to have much effect on them. So just,
Well, that's why I have
Just-
the next page.
I know what the next page is because I've seen it. And so I think that one has to acknowledge somehow that that people aren't there in their minds yet, where they really need to be, to even have the discussion, because they're not, and so I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say here. Because I think that council is not the one we have to convince.
Well, that's my purpose
so-
of the two quotes on the slide that Paul has up there. You can't read those quotes. And if you respect the IPCC, now some people may not, but if you respect these scientists, you can't read those quotes and not shake in your boots.
Well, I know, the point I was trying to make is that a lot of Vermonters don't think it applies to us here as much. So that's what I think it might be useful to address.
To some degree, the forecasts say it won't, of all the places in the US in 20 years, this will be one of the more livable. So to some degree, they're right, but it doesn't mean it's good.
Can I suggest a brief pause and just taking a half step back to talk about sort of strategically how you want to approach this without getting into the details?
No.
So what the task force has been talking about is proposing upfront a action of an ordinance that would come before the rest of the plan. So don't forget that you will also be presumably talking with the council in September, just a month or two later, where you're providing the plan in a graphically interesting way. And hopefully, it's gonna pop nicely about, that there is a rubric to this. So, your choice as to whether you would like to propose to have this go first, and that, there's certainly good reasons to do that. What information is needed for that meeting? And what information do you want to give a more global presentation about all the work that you've done the last 8 months and talk about it in the context of everything? And I think it's hard because you can't give an ordinance without giving some of this background, but you also don't necessarily need to try to load everything into this meeting, because this isn't the meeting about the climate action plan.
See, I think if this meeting's objective is to get the attention of the city council on the housing sector on the most important action, then I think the context setting has to be very specific to the housing sector.
That's what I.
For example,
Exactly.
if the following message needs to be illustrated, South Burlington's baseline is 200,000 metric tons. 40% of that comes from housing sector. And we expect that to reduce by 60% by 2030 through a set of actions. However, in the meantime, we are adding new construction. new construction contributes this much incrementally. This is why we need to stop natural gas. So that needs to be a very concise, powerful message that they need to recognize and say, okay, then they're gonna say, are we gonna start doing it tomorrow? Are we gonna let all the units in the pipeline go and not stop them? I mean, there's just gonna be a lot of
That has-
gears turning, you
There's
know?
more impact
Yeah,
when you
exactly.
get right to the point.
Right,
So I
yeah,
think even though these things are, they're all very important,
yeah,
but I think impact wise, it's better to get right to the point.
yeah,
I'd say, I think, in order to set, so I will be forceful and focus on the building sector requirements. But I think it's really important for the public to hear and for the council to hear that they're gonna be asked to do something that they're uncomfortable with. And if we just jump right into, well, Ickley said this and that's why you should do it. I don't think it's gonna have as much sway as first setting up the basic science. Takes 5 minutes. Let's start the basic science again, why we care about this, to put people in the proper frame of mind for the ask.
Well, I think this one puts people,
yeah, I think
In the
this
frame of
one
mind.
is a very powerful one that says that people in Vermont do believe that they're worried and they want to do something. You know, and I think that's a very powerful summary.
the one before that, I think if it was addressing more Vermont, the realities in Vermont with this, we're probably gonna have more of an effect from people transitioning from other locales that are more affected, than
Yeah, I mean, it's
the
interesting.
direct impact
You know,
of the climate
it's kind of
itself.
interesting that, I agree and disagree with what you're saying there, Donna, because when, fisheries collapse, when hundreds of millions of people are migrating off the coast or from areas where there's drought or floods, we're gonna feel that even if our local climate is fine. We're gonna feel the economic and, supply side impacts of all of that much more dramatically than focusing on just kind of the local climate change impacts. We're gonna feel all that. We're not an island. And so I think it's really important that people understand these global impacts that will adversely impact us dramatically, even if our local climate is still not so bad.
And it's because our local is not so bad that we will see a bigger impact than other places.
Yeah, like maybe the first paragraph, the first warning is the dire warning, and then the second warning maybe is what this means to Vermont, what this means to Chittenden
Well,
County even.
Look, I mean, it's a question of how much text to put in this PowerPoint. And I could add,
The point.
I
the
could
point
add
of it, bringing it
another,
home.
that's why I said Vermont is not an island. I was gonna speak to a little bit. I mean, I could add a few more words to this slide. It's
No,
a,
there's
it's
enough
balanced.
words, there's enough
That's what I'm
words.
saying. There is enough words.
There's enough words, but I don't know that they're the right words.
So
Okay.
let me take a step back and I am thinking about the time of 30 minutes, if we're granted 30 minutes, which is a pretty big chunk of council meetings. There's 18 slides in here now, given the amount of content in them, it's hard to get through these slides,
It is.
1 minute apiece, in my
I
experience.
can do this in a half hour. I'm sure I can.
Well, I think you can get through the slides in half an hour, but I assume that we want some time to have some back and forth with the council and try to get them over the line. So I guess I would recommend trying to pare things down just from the
Well, we
perspective
could
of
ask
trying
for
to.
more time.
You ask them
but
for an hour.
I'm pretty confident
This
a half
is
hour
life
is
and
right,
death stuff.
is the right time frame. Look, when we asked for the initial climate change resolution, the deck was similar. And it was about a half hour and it went fine.
See, I think you want to engage them to have a discussion. If it's all a one-dimensional presentation, I'm just not sure whether
Why do you say it's one dimensional?
you have to ask, I mean, there's a lot of content. They have to be able to read it, understand it. Maybe they will review it, maybe they'll not review it ahead of time. I really think that if you're trying to do the context setting, maybe 6-7 slides in 30 minutes. That's all you need. And then be very specific and be very focused. That's what I would suggest.
Have you ever heard of Pechacucho?
What?
Kachakucha?
Kachakucha, it's a way of presenting things that gives you 5 minutes, literally, to present, you know.
20 slides, 20 seconds a slide.
Yeah, it's a really fast pace, but we did that last year with public policy, a lot of it around climate change.
Yeah.
And it was very effective, and everybody thought it was really good, you know, because it forces you to say, what are our main points? You know, what are the main things that we want you to remember? Because those things are things that people remember.
Yeah.
Whereas you get 20 slides, you're lucky if they remember any of it.
So one question that I would have, because like, there's a lot of great content in here. From my, and this is just my personal opinion from having given a lot of presentations, that I like to have as few words on each slide as possible. However, I agree that having some background material for the council to digest ahead of time, having something on the public record for people to get the background of why we're making these recommendations, there's value to all of that. I wonder if there's a way that we can provide something like this as a background primer for them to read, but then have a more streamlined slide deck for giving something what Donna's talking about, of like really trying to take them through some of the bullet points, presuming that they've already read the.
So yes,
or the
but I
other
would
way
say
around.
that the background, you know, again, it's coming 6 weeks later in the plan. You know, I don't see any reason why this slide, for example, can't be right at the page 1 of your plan if you'd like. I don't want to forget that the whole, like, packaging it together is coming right behind this, another presentation to council and the documentation. So, you know, encouraging you to be, I think it is important to context set so that it's not just sort of floating out there, but.
Yeah, see, there are really 3 elements to this. If I look at all the material that Andrew has prepared, there is some really good stuff here. There are really 3 elements to this message, I think. One is, why are we focusing on housing, and why are we focusing on this ordinance? That's number 1. Number 2, by the way, this is what Burlington did. You know, it's not like it's something impossible. Other cities have done that, so he's got some material on that. Then the third is, if you're successful in implementing the actions we are recommending, this is the kind of action we need to take over the next 10 years to get to the 66% target. And by the way, stopping new constructions with natural gas is a big aspect of that. So to me, those are like 3 elements of that message. That's all they need to hear.
There's gonna be counselors that wanna understand the economics, they're gonna understand how this is played out in other places, who's done it, they're gonna have those questions. And I think we need, we don't have to spend a lot of time, I can just refer people, look, all those questions are answered on page 10 or page 11. I think it's important to have it here.
So
And we should avoid the words 10 years.
yes, Darlene.
You can stop me if you think this is off topic, but I went to the Economic Development Committee meeting, the last one, and Srini was giving his report on what's going on with climate change. And he mentioned this action. And Srini, you check me on this, but I understood Jesse Baker to say that if it does not have an implementation part, this is something she would never recommend to the city council. So if we think the city council is going to say, good idea, let's toss it to our city manager to start getting the works going, I think you need to know that she really dug in on that. And I was surprised because 2 city councilors were sitting in the audience. This was a meeting with the UMall guy, so there were lots of people there. But I think you want to have some discussion because you want that to get outed so you can answer it.
So can I build on that, Darlene? Because I think that one thing I'm realizing is not necessarily present in this, that I think a lot of great presentations and basic argumentative essays have is raising the counter arguments that exist for your thesis, and then answering the counter arguments so that you can address them before they come up. And so I think, that's, Darlene, that sounds like one example of something that we need to have an answer for, and we should probably think through What are the other concerns? You know, are there gonna be pushbacks from?
The city attorney made that point. The city attorney made that point. And so there's lots of leverage for that. And Paul, I'm sure she's discussed it with you, this issue of implementation. So
When you
Right,
say
so that's what I'm saying of, you know, when you talk about asking the council to take action, this is gonna be, if it moves forward, a major piece of city legislation. That means it will need to be done in a precipitous step-by-step way, which will involve, you know, I know that time is a very important factor here, but it is the city manager's job to identify what are the costs associated with it, what is the long-term implications of it, present that to council, then council will say, yes, please proceed with, you know, warning a public hearing on something like this, then
Right.
taking public input. So it will be a multi-month process once the council, if the council says, yes, we're interested. And that may not be on the night that they're presented. Very classically, our city council and most hear something and then they digest it, and then they will schedule another meeting to take action on it. It's very hard for a group of volunteers who, again, can't meet outside of,
right.
you know, a public setting to make a decision of that consequence on the spot. So, you know, I'm not saying temper your expectations, but plan them out.
Right.
And think about, you've got another presentation 2 months later, how do you join them together? So it sounds like a connected discussion. You have an opportunity to be in front of them potentially twice in 3 months, which is really unique
Right.
opportunity.
Dylan, thanks for pointing it out. I mean, I have it on my list, stakeholders, getting input from stakeholders, and I think Jesse is an important stakeholder.
Well,
I-
she's going to mention the city attorney's opinion. Is my guess.
Yeah, so I guess my point is, I think the way I read her comments were, she wants a full understanding of all the work that is required from the city office to pursue some of these recommendations. And she wants to make sure that she will dedicate the appropriate resources. So she wants to go through the process and figure out what would it take for this ordinance. And then, you know, she wants to get up in front of the city council. So it's just a perspective of a manager. You know, I heard a perspective of a manager who's trying to manage a bunch of resources. That's what I heard. So I think it's important to get her on our side and figure out what is it going to take to move this forward. The other stakeholders we heard was, somebody asked the question, have you guys talked to Vermont Gas about this? You know, I know that there is some interaction with you and Vermont Gas at a different level, but they're an important stakeholder here. You know, how do you make sure that you get their perspective, or is it going to be a surprise for them? You know, so I think there were some good suggestions that came out of that meeting. That's the email I sent to the both of you after the Economic Development Committee meeting.
Maybe the way to approach this is the reverse of what Srini suggested, which is send the council ahead of time the context setting, a fairly short presentation or document, which sets out what's coming, what we will be talking about. And then they'll be prepared, and they'll probably have give them an opportunity to think about it and prepare their questions rather than do it on the fly on the night that this, is presented.
Beforehand, right? Well, I mean, don't they get the materials a week ahead or so?
They get it on the Friday before the meeting.
Yeah, it's 4 days, 3 days, and it's over a weekend.
But I think on an important topic like this, there has got to be a way for getting some buy-in early on and make sure that people understand what's coming. If you're going to rely on this 30-minute presentation at the city council meeting to get everybody on board, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Well, so you do have a council member who is a non-voting member of the task force, and an update to, I think maybe everybody knows this, but the council recently made a policy choice to have all committees have a liaison from council, specifically to foster stronger communication. So, you know, a next step here could be that one or two of you meet with Helen and maybe, you know, Helen would recommend a meeting with the city manager to prepare for a presentation like this. You know, and then there can be some issues that get vetted, questions, helping to shape the presentation, helping to shape, you know, what the city manager's perspective as to what the ask might be, what Helen's perspective on what the ask might be at this meeting.
Yeah.
And lay some of that out so it doesn't, it's not a black box going into the meeting.
Yeah,
We could answer the city manager's questions at the meeting. And I mean, it's a question like cart before the horse, like what's the first step here, right? I like, to me, the first step is to get it on the agenda and we'll figure it out. Helen's already announced to the council that this is coming.
Yes, she has. She has announced.
Yeah, I mean, they already expect this on the agenda. And she expects it on the agenda.
Yep.
I don't know that we should take it as a given though, that it's gonna get passed and.
Oh, I'm
supported.
not saying that at all, but that's why I think all this content is really important. I'm not taking that for granted. I intend to make a really powerful pitch for it.
So how many of the counselors know that, you know, we're asking for an ordinance that will.
Well, they all know it now.
Disallow
They all know
natural
it now.
gas.
They all know.
Yeah,
They all
right,
know that now,
right, it came up, and again, it wasn't part of the discussion because the discussion was what could the school do.
right?
No, Helen, no, it was part of the discussion. At the last city council meeting, Helen gave a report on the task force and
Okay.
said, this is what we're considering. And we're soon gonna be in front of the council and make this, she mentioned me, it's gonna make this presentation in front of the council. So they know it's coming.
Was there any feedback from the rest of the
No,
council?
they all listened and great, let's hear it.
I mean, Helen makes comments on the task force at every city council meeting. She always says, here's what's going on, and it's only a few sentences, etc. She did say that this is coming and they want an ordinance. So I'm not sure that you need to meet with Helen and the city manager. I mean, that's one mechanism. I would think you would maybe want to meet with Helen since she's on the task force.
Helen's already seen the deck and she told me she thought it was great.
Okay, great. Then that's perfect. I personally think this is fine. I think people should have, you know, I favor more rather than less. I think this is fine. You can hit what's important, but they have it. They're going to have it in their packet ahead. So there's lots of detail that's very useful. This is a group that actually reads before their meetings. And at least I think that most city councilors do. And, you know that Megan Emery is going to have a zillion questions. There's going to be a lot of, I think there'll be discussion. I would save time for discussion and sort of blitzkrieg through these. So they've had it all, they have a lot to read ahead of time. And then you blitzkrieg your report. And then you have time for comments, questions, you know. I'd like to hear a little comment after this. And you could cue Helen that you want a little discussion. And she would make sure that happens.
Pretty sure there's gonna be discussion.
Yeah. But
There's
if
gonna be
they drop
discussion.
other things like, you know, okay, thank you very much.
See,
Anyway. I think it's good. I think it's,
can I ask a process question here? Are we reviewing content? Are we reviewing approach? Or, I mean, we're kind of sort of going in a,
I mean, I think it's all of the above, right? We're giving feedback
Okay.
to Andrew on
So-
how to make this successful.
so going back to the three elements that I suggested. The first element is context setting, right, specific to the housing sector. I think that content is not here. That content needs to be developed or added.
Again, it was like,
Building,
to me, a
not
balance of how much to put in. I did
Commercial as well.
put in,
Yeah.
you see the deck that I sent to the planning commission, more detail around that.
Andrew, my suggestion is a very simple slide. It's from Melanie and Anne's work.
No, I know.
Can I complete, please? So the context that I am suggesting is, this is the portion of the construction housing sector. Did you use the word construction?
Building and thermal,
Building and housing sector.
building and thermal.
For South Burlington, which is roughly about 40 or 45% of the 200,000 tons. The current plan calls for reducing that by 66% by 2030, right? Whatever the number is. Now, the issue here is the contribution of the new construction. The new construction, if it is 120 units a year that we are adding on average, they add roughly about 1,000 tons a year. So by 2030, you'll have additional 7,000 tons.
Melanie and Ann were gonna go away and calculate that, right? Because it wasn't really clear in the last.
It's 7 to 12 tons. There is a lot of, publications.
No, I know, but they were gonna calculate that, right? We don't have that in the materials right now.
That's what I said. That material is lacking. That's what I said.
But we don't have that in the materials provided to us yet.
Okay. So having said that, and then you have this important slide, which is a powerful one, which is a summary of our action, which is slide number 12, which is South Burlington's climate action plan specific to the building and housing sector. This is what is ahead of us. In spite of doing this, you still have to do something about new construction.
Well, that's why I bolded all new construction be net zero.
Yeah, so I was just trying to, in the context setting, it is important to say that if you don't do anything about new construction between now and 2030, you're going to add roughly another 7,000 tons of CO2, while the baseline is.
I hear you. I'd love to know what that number is before we go into the council.
using
And
the-
I know that Melanie and Ann were working on that number.
Yeah,
And when they come up with it, I think that'd be a great number to add.
I'm just using that as an example for context setting. So that's number one. The second is, by the way, Burlington has done this. This is what is involved in Burlington. And then the third is really what is ahead, what we would like to see as a schedule. And why is it important to do this? I think those are the three things that we need to work on. All this background material, whether it stays here, whether it goes in a backup content, to me, that's not the center of the discussion.
I think merely telling the council that Burlington has done it is not going to be as persuasive
Yeah,
as also telling the council 77 jurisdictions across the United States
sure.
have done this, and then also sharing with the council some of the economic studies
Yeah.
that show, it's economic, right? It's not going to cost more. I mean, I think they're going to need all of this
Yeah.
to convince themselves that this is something to move forward with.
Well, definitely the part that it's not gonna cost more, because
Yeah, they're
that's,
going to need that.
that's what everybody asks.
That's what they're
Well,
going
we
to want.
can't, they always say, oh, well, can we afford it?
Yes.
That's
yes,
always
we-
part-
we-
so I
we
agree,
need
that-
to- We
that
need
needs to
to
be in
address
there.
that.
Don't we have a meeting on July 14th now? Can we target to have a more revised specific content by July 14th to look at based on the input here?
Well, Srini, so I heard that you want to add something about
Yeah.
how much greenhouse gas would be emitted if we don't convert to net zero. And I think that would be great to add if we get that number from.
I think it's essential. I don't think without that, you're setting the context. All this other stuff is all nice to know, right? It's all great
Look,
stuff.
I'm not
There's
sure
all kinds
that
of material there.
Telling the council metric tons is gonna be, it's.
Put in percentage terms. if you want.
Yeah, I think you
Can
have
I,
to
can
put
I
it-
suggest, there's a lot of great information here. The key question to me that I think you're trying to get across to council is, why should this be the first action?
Exactly.
Why is it important that this be the first action? The answer may be about metric tons, it may be about, at the very beginning of this process, you talked, there was a demographics presentation. What makes South Burlington different from all the rest of the state of Vermont? One of the things is you see a lot of new housing. You talked at your last meeting about the opportunity to have homes be efficient is easiest at the very beginning of the process. I think the question of why should the council move quickly on this one, and why is this the one thing you picked out for the entire plan? If you can hone in on that question, and I don't want to guess all the ways that you want to answer that, but I think if you can answer that question, that would be a really helpful thing. And then I might suggest you've got a fair amount in here that, well, you've got at least one slide that talks about all the rest of the climate action plan. I'm hesitating sharing that because you may lose some of the punch of delivering it 2 months later. because you might get some eyes starting to glaze over, oh yeah, we saw this 2 months ago, whereas, I think the next one you want to be talking about you want to, be able to hit highlights each time. What are you trying to get across at this meeting?
And in efficiency program parlance, it's called lost opportunity program. This is absolutely, that's the whole point. It's like, we are losing opportunity every single time another house gets built or proposed. And these are the numbers. These are the numbers. We can't afford to keep losing these opportunities to reduce
Yeah.
the fossil fuel use.
And I would say if you want to focus on building and housing, slide 9 and 10, I'm not really sure, what message it helps send. One is around the trend of CO2 emissions between 1990 and 2016. One is around Vermont has got the highest per capita emissions. I mean, this is all nice to know background material, but I don't think it helps the focus on the building and housing sector. So, and then the last comment I had was around, getting some vetting or input from the stakeholders, and I think Darlene already brought that up. And then the next one is really timing. I mean, maybe when it comes to deliverables, we can talk about that. If you need an opportunity to review the revised content one more time, I don't know when the next 3 city council meetings are. I don't know whether we would do this before September in the August meeting, but I'm not sure.
Look, what I'd like to do is see if we can reword this to include the thoughts and approve this now and get it on the agenda. I just like we keep talking about all this process and not, I just think we need to figure out how to move forward more.
Well, I think that's what we're saying, just simplify it, cut out the extraneous stuff, and then we can go move forward. There's a lot of extraneous stuff in there that probably, it's watering down the presentation.
So if you'd like to start to work to a date, I did speak with our city manager today, and she identified that there could be room on the August 1st council agenda as a date to work towards. If that's a date that works for you or a date later out.
Great.
It gives, that's enough time to.
So if we're working towards August 1st, then we have potentially 2 more meetings to finalize this, right?
Right now, the only scheduled meeting is the 14th of July that you have. But you could schedule another one if you want.
I mean, typically we do one in the last week, but did we opt not to do one, or have we just not scheduled it? I don't want
Well, if
to.
you recall, originally the schedule was once a month and you added some extras for certain strategic months. So we'll talk about schedule in a few minutes. If you want to add one, add one.
Okay. No, that's fine. I'm just trying to, we have at least one though, right? So we can go through a revision cycle without losing any time for that August 1st target, right?
Yeah, July 15th, yeah.
We've already given Andrew, particularly Srini, a lot of ideas that he can incorporate or modify this deck. I don't want to spend another one of our meetings on this subject. And we should try, if we can, to get it on the council agenda before August 1st.
August 1st is the first available agenda. The city manager is not in town on the 18th, and that's not a good strategy to present without your city manager there.
Nothing in July? How many
The council has a strategic meeting on the 11th to go over their policy priorities for the whole next year. So August 1st is the next available date.
Well, that works, that's fine. Donna, you want to try and remove the extraneous material, or you want to tell me what you think is extraneous?
Outside of this meeting, sure.
Okay.
So it sounds like, okay, so
Well,
what I'm
wait a
hearing
minute,
is,
Happy to.
no. You made a proposal. Let's do it now.
well,
I don't.
doing it now sounds like we're gonna take another
Yeah,
half
that
hour.
would take the rest of the meeting.
And we still have-
potentially.
Why don't we each send Andrew our comments? How would that work?
We should have done that long ago.
you want to wordsmith every line of this as a group tonight?
Lord, no.
No,
No,
I'm not asking for wordsmith. I'm
No, I-
asking for the content to focus on the message.
No, I understand. I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't see the urgency of voting to approve this
Yeah.
now when we don't have to deliver it for a month. I don't see what it benefits us.
No, I'd say by the next meeting, we should have
Yeah, next
something that
meeting,
we
yeah.
can
So
all look
if
at
you-
and say, yeah.
If
this
you
is
did
good.
want to move the ball forward, you have not actually decided to advance this to council in advance of the rest of the climate action plan. If you were ready to say that, yes, you would like to do that, that could be an action you could do tonight to get that on the record and get it scheduled for council. So I might suggest, even if you're not quite done with the presentation, you may or may not want to review it again. That's an action, if you're ready for it, you could do, and I could relay that over to get it scheduled.
Yes, we do want to get it on the schedule.
Yeah, I'm in favor of getting it on the agenda and get the ball rolling. I just have some very specific approach issues here.
So,
I
yeah,
think we
I'm,
need to be
I
prepared,
was
so.
welcome to all,
Yeah,
comments on this. I mean, that's why I sent it out in advance.
I mean, it should be supported by all of us, right?
Right.
That's why
So,
we have the next
yeah.
meeting to review.
It should be, in fairness, Srini, this is a democratic institution. It should be supported by a majority of us.
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
If there's a minority that doesn't like it, that's their prerogative to express that.
Well, why don't
yeah,
So I would then make a motion that this presentation to the council be scheduled for their August 1st meeting.
Motion.
Hang on, Paul, we could vote on that. Paul, I think you had mentioned that there was a second piece of this that needed to be in there, or am I missing it? That you had said that it was necessary to not only ask for time on the agenda, but also to vote as a council that we wanted to advance this idea. or
Well,
to
so I
produce
think that's
Michael's-
embedded, right? If you're asking to present on this topic of the ordinance first, then that's a decision that you're making. The city manager and the city council chair will pick the date, but I think the action that you're doing is that you would like to formally request to be able to make a presentation as soon as possible to council. And then I'm saying that August 1st is the likely date. They choose the date. But yes.
Then I would change that motion, if possible, on August 1st.
Okay, and
I,
second,
Second,
any further discussion before we vote? Carolyn, did you have a comment?
no, I was seconding it at the same
Oh,
time.
sorry. Okay, and Bill, just in deference to the folks on video, any comments before we go to a vote?
No comments.
All in favor of bringing this to the council?
Aye.
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 Now, for scheduling purposes, do you want me to plan to have any discussion of the content on your next meeting agenda? So you've decided that you're going to be presenting it. Do you want to have an opportunity to discuss any of it next meeting?
Yes, I think we should review, if possible, obviously we should review whatever changes are made to this deck
yeah,
based on the input from any of us to Andrew. And we should set a deadline that we're going to get this information to him by
Right.
a certain date, a date certain.
Well, if we're meeting, when are we meeting? July 15th? We're going to talk about
14th.
July 14th. So,
And keep in mind, that is also the night that you're seeing the first full draft of the plan.
right.
That's why I think we should,
Schedule a longer meeting. 2.5 hours won't do it.
7 to
I mean-
10 it is.
so can we say that we'll get our comments to Andrew by the end of next week?
Yes.
The date
Yeah,
there?
let's get the comments to Andrew by the 8th, and Andrew, I assume you'll be able to, or I hope you'd be able to get it back to us a little in advance so we can all read it, and hopefully we won't have to have a lengthy discussion on it at that meeting. Unfortunately, we can't really discuss it ahead of time, right? Because it'll be open meeting issues, so we have to.
Right, I mean, I'll send the comments tomorrow, but I'm happy to help you, with some of the suggestions,
But-
any specific content.
Andrew can, through Paul, can distribute the modified
Yeah,
presentation based on the input.
sure.
Right.
And then individuals can go back to him and say, no, that's not what I meant.
Yeah.
Well, and Andrew can have,
We can't all do that, but you can only do it once with.
One-on-one, you can give all the comments.
he could do one-on-one.
Yep.
He could call me up and say, I got your comments, Carolyn, and here's why I really don't want to do your third thing. And I want you to understand that, so you're okay with it, and we don't have to
Yeah.
time meeting on it.
Okay,
Last thing I'll say, Andrew, just for scheduling purposes, July 27th would be your deadline to, whatever is going to go in the council packet would need to be to Jesse by that date.
Okay,
Um,
thank you, Paul.
All right, so next item on the agenda, we were going to talk about equity before we got to the outreach schedule, right?
Yes. So I can give an update on that. So I think at the last meeting, Melanie and Ann did speak a little bit about it. What they said was that they had started, and they had talked with me about this as well. They had started to go through and try to look at each action and run it through an equity rubric. And they face some of the same challenges that frankly the state climate group did, which is it's very hard to look at a 10-page analysis report for 70 different actions. So they had two suggestions to me that to me made some sense. One was to focus on the high impact actions. Those are the ones that are the really big ones that are the most impactful in all ways to folks. So that brings the list down to about 10 things to really focus on. The second one was they had recommended to me, and you'll be seeing this in your presentation at the next meeting, that hang on one second. Switching this two screens thing is an interesting challenge. That it focused on the following questions. 1, who is helped? 2, who is harmed? 3, what is missing?
Who's missing?
Who's missing? And then from the climate council's rubric, these 4 areas, that this be the areas of focus. For how to then implement, how to think about equity in a way that is manageable, essentially. And so they're going to talk about this more at the next meeting, but that's their proposal as to how to go about this, knowing that this is the first plan that South Burlington is trying to look at this, and that, I'll be honest, we don't have a structure of, as I think we've identified over the last few months, to from day one bring in equity. This is the trial run of the first time we're thinking about it, so it's a little bit bumpy, but so that's what they are recommending.
So you said the first review identified like 70 actions, and it was just not realistic to do the evaluation for all the 70 actions, right? So
It's not realistic time-wise, but it's also not realistic of many of the actions support other actions. So
okay,
if the question is, some of the actions are promote XYZ, well, how do you, it just becomes this messy thing that isn't really looking at equity, to be honest.
So your second part of the comment said they have identified 10 actions and they feel comfortable about focusing on that and going through this specific exercise.
Yes, well, so the 10 is a estimated number, the high impact actions,
okay.
the ones that at your last meeting sort of came onto the
Yeah.
major slide as being,
Okay.
these are the big ones.
So I have a couple of questions and thoughts on that. If it is, let's say, 10 or 12 actions, whatever the number is, that evaluation or exercise, they're gonna do it on their own and they're gonna present it to us?
I think that they are gonna start with considerations for you.
Okay.
I think that this becomes the starting point, not the ending point of it. I don't think that realistically, two people who are very dedicated employees of the RPC aren't gonna be able to answer all these questions. It's more,
Okay.
they will be doing a very first brush of what kinds of things, what questions does this bring up? I
Okay.
think that's where we'll get with this from
Yeah.
realistically.
The these points always bring up kind of the same issue in my brain. And that is, the who is helped question is the one that comes out. Because it seems like different policies and different plans can impact different people in a lot of different ways. So you sort of have to identify who you're talking about. Like if you're talking about weatherization, we kind of know who, maybe not groups. I mean, we sort of talk around this issue by who is impacted. I think we should always identify, who is impacted by this. There's people living in apartment, pretty old apartments who are likely impacted by weatherization, things like that. But then on agriculture, it's a completely different set of things. People may be living in brand spanking new multifamily housing, and yet they're food insecure, and so there may be a whole different set of things that apply for that set of people. It may not have the same climate impact, but it has a lot of impact on their lives.
Wasn't Paul saying that the exercise that Ann and Melanie were going through would be done separately on each one of the high impact actions? So on each
Well-
one of them, each of those, we'll call it 10 again, it's
Yeah,
not.
but I don't think agriculture is a high impact action in South
So
Burlington.
maybe it won't be addressed at all, but of
Which is
the,
why I think it's a problem, because food is a problem for these impacted communities, much more than probably, fuel may be a problem as well. But if they're in South Burlington, they're in multifamily housing already, there's a pretty good chance, they have access to transportation, probably more than they have access to food.
right, so this would take us back to the sort of high level recommendations of the Vermont Climate Council's advice on equity, which is rather than waiting until we've already figured out the top things we want to recommend and then deciding whether they
Right.
are hurting people or not, we first start out and say, what's the greatest harm to be done? What's the greatest that we can do to help? And how do we do that in the process of implementing the climate plan?
Yeah.
But we unfortunately passed that point.
Figure out who are the impacted people,
Yeah,
and then figure out which of these things are of most benefit to those impacted people, because it may not be the same as the ones making the biggest impact
talk to the
in
people.
terms of
Yeah.
carbon reduction.
Right, and actually have a conversation with the people who are impacted so that we don't just make assumptions about
Right,
Yeah.
what matters to them, right?
right.
Yeah, no, I think that's best practice, but we've struggled with that all the way along to
And
actually
we will.
bring that into the
I mean,
process.
we will struggle with these issues for years into the future. I don't think that this is something that there's a solution to. There's a lot of hard questions to be asked for a long time.
So Paul, my intent of bringing up this topic was, if you don't address this in some form before the public engagement, I think it'll be a credibility issue. I think, we talked about it like at 3 different meetings, we talked about the evaluation. And I think if Anne and Melanie feel that, they can do some level of justice to this exercise for the high level actions, then at least acknowledge that and say that, look, this is a start and it's a very challenging topic for us. and make it very clear and upfront to the community that this is an issue where we need to spend a lot more time. I kind of feel like if you don't talk about it, it feels like they're glossing over it.
Okay, that's fair, and I think, you know, and I'm not an expert in the subject area, but my response to that would be the work with ICLEI identified a universe of, you know, 8 or 10 actions that really ultimately, one way or another, are how we, you know, we have to reduce vehicle miles traveled, we have to have buildings produce less thermal. Those are, there's only so many pathways to getting to the to climate. The question is, how do you implement them in a way that is, to me, that is equitable? So when we talk about how do we reduce vehicle miles traveled, if we were to say, you know, I'll be hyperbolic and say, nobody's allowed to use a car anymore, sorry, that would likely have a disproportionate impact on certain people.
Yeah.
But I think that these hard questions become a sort of halfway into the implementation, because the very broad elements, they're known as to what needs to be broadly done. It's just, how does one get there? How do you reduce vehicle miles traveled in a way that is?
That's why I'm suggesting that maybe for the, you know, for this kind of impact, maybe it's better to focus, instead of on the major climate action measures, to focus on the people and what their needs are. Because when you, and if we're talking people who live in South Burlington, you know, low-income people living in South Burlington, what are their biggest issues that relate to climate change? And it's probably not transportation, it's probably definitely weatherization and heating fuel. It may have something to do with transportation depending on where their jobs are. But if they are fortunate enough to be able to live here, they don't have nearly the same problem as these folks that live up in St. Albans and have to travel every day down to here. But I can guarantee you, they probably have food issues. You know, they probably are having a lot of food issues, because even, you know, everybody's having food issues these days, looking at the prices of everything.
Right, and I don't disagree, but
So, I
the
mean,
high impact actions aren't in the area of food.
well, that's what I mean. So you're
Can I-
basically gonna
can I
be
ask-
ignoring a lot of the, you know, of the impact on the most vulnerable, because you're focusing on the ones with the most climate concern.
But can I play it out, Donna? So would we potentially, if we went down that path, so let's assume that we were able to do some kind of exercise, and I won't try to answer who does it and in what time. We did some kind of exercise and we found a different set of 10 randomly, you know, give or take, items that were like the most important items that have something to do with climate and the biggest impact on equity.
Right.
Would we then come out with 2 lists and say, here's our 10 equity things and here's our 10 climate things, and maybe a couple of them happen to show up on both lists? Or how would we reconcile that?
I think it would be good just to identify them. And then, you know, which of these are measures that we can actually do something about?
So Donna, I'm totally on board with a lot of what you're saying here. I think some of what you're talking about is an equity plan for the city. That isn't necessarily a climate action plan and how do we do it equitably. It's an equity plan for the city, which, you know, I'm very excited about the prospect of how do we listen to people about what their needs are?
And some
How
of
does their
these-
community
And
serve
some
them
of these, and some of these things happen to fall under the, you know, on some of the list of climate action measures as well. They just may not be the very top ones.
Right, so, you know, maybe part of the outreach here is to understand that, you know, the focus for this is climate action, but we're all volunteers or employees or residents of the same community, and we should be cross-pollinating information. So if somebody wants to say, you know, it's, you know, my feedback on the climate action plan is really tangential because I'm food insecure, we should get that information to provide to the planning commission, to provide to the beginning of creating an equity plan for the city, and note it in the climate action plan, but say this is really about food insecurity or whatever it might be. I guess that would be my suggestion, is that, you know, we
Just acknowledge that they definitely are related.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, because the transportation and the food issues seem to be ones that
Mesh.
they seem to affect people in the urban areas, as well as in rural areas, but I don't know. I just don't know which of the issues that specifically are relating to
Yeah.
South Burlington, because we don't know who, it's not like we're interviewing people and finding this out.
Yeah, but for example, investing more in public transit is an equity issue. Getting kids to use the school bus, getting all kids, as many as possible, to use the school bus service is an equity issue, because the children who do use the school bus don't have that choice. They can't afford to have their own little car.
It's like a negative equity issue. The people who are doing the right things are the ones that can't afford anything else.
But
As it's ridiculous.
But it's
But it's
inequitable.
true. I mean, it's so much, it's so much of the climate
It's
action
inequitable.
issues. It's the people who can afford everything are the ones who are being most wasteful. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, people, the equity question is really, these people aren't doing nearly as much harm to the environment as the people with lots of,
Yeah.
Right,
lots
so
of
then the
money.
question becomes, when the city advances a policy or investment, is it being delivered in a way that is
Equitable.
supporting, answering those questions right there?
Well, I mean, and the other side as well is if we're trying to solve the issues of equity, but we are exacerbating our climate problems because we've siloed the two discussions, then
Well,
here we have both these
right.
processes.
And
like fighting
I
against each other,
wholeheartedly
which-
agree, and this is, the most fascinating part of my chosen career is that everything is very interconnected. And that's a representation of the fact that this task force is made up of people from a whole bunch of different committees who all have a role to play in climate and vice versa.
So coming back to, it looks like we have to rely on Anne and Melanie to do the body of work. Is there an opportunity to review the work in progress at some point between now and September on what they have? Because
So,
yeah.
right, I'm on the edge of what they've talked with me about. It was a short conversation. I
Okay.
think that they want to talk with you at your next meeting about this subject.
Okay,
This is the information that they've got.
okay.
I think I've gone as far as I can say is about
Okay.
what
Okay,
what
good.
their recommendations with it are, but this is the general rubric around what they're thinking about. And then who does it, I think that's a question to, share with them.
So my only point is, whatever work in progress, whatever we've been able to do in this reasonable time frame, I think that needs to be acknowledged, with whatever public engagement we have. I don't think it would be a good idea to go in and say, no, we haven't had a chance to do the equity stuff. Think about the equity stuff.
Well,
I think-
most of our actions are focused on reducing greenhouse gas. And really, Donna, what you're talking about is, resiliency or mitigate, like, soon we're not gonna be able to reduce greenhouse gases and there's gonna be adverse impacts. What actions can we take to help address those adverse impacts, right? And we didn't really
What
focus
I
too much on those
really-
things.
I'll tell you what I'm really focusing on is what I've seen over the last 20 years around here. And that is the efficiency programs giving 98% of their money to the most wealthy people who can afford to do these things even without the
Well, I was focusing on your
incentives.
food comments.
That's a generalization, but the problem with the way incentives have been derived is you have to be able to afford 90% of the cost of something to get 10%. And so, that really has to be addressed, that the people who most need weatherization are the ones who haven't gotten it.
But the weatherization programs for low-income.
Those
Well, for free.
weatherization programs were limited to spending $2,000 per unit, which meant that they've, all the work that's been done, they did like a tiny fraction of what was
The
needed.
EV programs are definitely targeted to low income.
Well, they will give more money to
Yeah.
people who have lower income, but you still have to have a lot of money to get through the program to get the money back.
And
There are loan programs.
absolutely
so-
acknowledging all that, a reminder, for this plan, the question is, what does the city of South Burlington? Does it mean that, is the action to then lobby these entities to change how they do it? Is it to supplement? You know, the whole discussion from the last several months has been, what is South Burlington's action? So I just want to make sure that, you know, we don't lose that, because there's a lot of programs that are great and maybe not so great out there. What is the action that is suggested of our community?
That's why I was coming back to, like, we didn't really focus on the type of actions, I think, John, that would address the issues that you are mentioning, right? Because we really addressed greenhouse gas emission actions. So maybe it makes sense to spend a session thinking about actions which don't directly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but do help folks who are gonna be impacted
Well,
by.
and one of the big ones,
We haven't really spent time doing that.
the Energy Action Network has been focusing on this, is workforce training. And, you know, I don't know to what degree impacted communities are able, you know, able or willing to, you know, train for jobs that are, I mean, there's a lot of labor needed to do a lot of this work, and some of it requires training and skills and some of it doesn't. But I just love to know, like, where the intersection of that is. Are there people that are, you know, are low income who could be trained? Or are there people who are just, you know, elderly and can't do anything? And why is it that these people haven't really taken much advantage of programs other than the CAP agencies? So, you know, I think a lot of it is I think if we only focused on weatherization and the people who haven't done anything, who haven't been able to, or
By and large, though, remember. that
haven't had access to
I'm
it.
just
A lot
looking
of what
back at
we're
our
recommending is
charter
not-
though.
What's that?
A lot of what we're recommending is not the same type of approach that programs take, where they're distributing incentive dollars.
Right.
So we may have similar pitfalls, but they will probably be a different set of pitfalls than the programs have dealt with, where they're trying to, you know, maximize the cost effectiveness of the incentive dollars that they're investing. And we're instead going to put out policies about all new homes have to have certain equipment in them and things like that, right? So that it's gonna look a little different. So if we're preparing for it, we need to,
It's code versus program.
right? Yeah, for the most part. So I
And the
think,
CAP agencies is largely a labor issue. So can we address labor issues within climate action?
So our charter, right, just looking back, it says task force is body set up for the sole purpose of developing a climate action plan that addresses the targets set by the council through resolution by the state of Vermont and state statute. So that's what our climate action plan is supposed to do, address the targets. And I guess that's what we've done. I don't think the council actually charged us with understanding the impacts to everyone, you know, of global climate change and what the city may need to do in that respect in the next decade, 2 or 3.
well, there's,
Well,
let's,
certainly
hang on
the
a second,
state,
let me,
the state was big.
let me-
That was
let
a
me pull
big
apart-
part of the climate action.
I'm just reading our
part
charter.
of, part of what I hear talking past here is there's resilience question, and which is adaptation, and there's an equity issue. And there are places where they intersect heavily
Sure.
in that
Yeah.
resilience challenges are gonna impact those populations more. But resilience impacts everyone, you know, adaptation impacts everyone, and the equity stuff is gonna be an issue even before we get to the heavy sort of resilience and adaptation challenges. So they're again related like all these things, but they are sort of two separate tracks that we need to think about a little separately.
I think for equity, we need to focus on the equity impacts of the actions that we've recommended to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and not the equity impacts of climate change generally, which I don't think we're tasked to resolve.
Right, and that, I agree with that.
Yeah, so just to your point, Andrew, I think if I look at the deliverables, the June 9th deliverable, which is the meeting 11, is review and accept equity scoring and considerations for the actions we are recommending.
Right,
So
Paul,
that's
do you
the-
disagree with that?
We
Our
called
scope-
it out.
what our
No, I-
scope
So
is?
did we ever do that?
No, that's why I'm bringing it up.
Right.
We're behind.
Right.
So
We're
we
changing
need
our
to-
scope.
We've
to-
kicked it down the road in part because we prioritized this, you know, advanced recommendation to the council, and it pushed some other things back.
Yeah, so that's what that's what motivated me to bring it. I was reviewing the deliverables and the schedule and, there's a
Well,
couple
and
of things.
right, absolutely, and to understand that, this project has evolved over the last 6 months too. In terms of where you've decided to put focus, like the ordinance, where you've decided to, maybe go a little bit deeper into actions and then pull out what are the high impact ones from it. So I think, there's naturally, this is a learning process for all of us.
But I just would caution the group to say that it's an easy default to ignore this.
No, but I just want to.
It's an easy default. So,
do you
so-
agree with
sorry, let
scope?
me just complete that. Sorry. It's an easy default to ignore this and just say, it's too much. I think it's better to do this as a work in progress and acknowledge that this is a challenging task and we need to spend more time on it.
Srini, I'm trying to understand what the this is, right? The scope of the this. Just please, so Paul, am I right that our scope is actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and not actions that mitigate the impacts of, climate change on vulnerable populations over the next decades?
I don't think that was Srini's
Please,
question though.
I just want to understand
But
scope.
you're changing the
because-
subject.
No,
because you're
Srini
not
said we need to
addressing what you
understand how
just said.
equity affects this, and I want to know what this is.
It's the greenhouse gas emission actions.
Okay, but
That's what
okay, but-
Each action.
that's what I just want to get
We're still
agreement
on,
on.
we're still on
because
mitigation, we're not talking
That's what I want
adaptation.
to get agreement on, that it's talking about the actions. we develop.
The deliverables cannot be more explicit. It's very simple. Look at the deliverables. It's very simple and direct. It's focused on the actions. That's what the deliverables is, and I would like to keep the discussion specific to that. So like, whatever we agree, let's just focus on that and agree what we're going to do in the next meeting.
And so I think back to what Paul was originally saying, if Melanie and Anne have taken the top 10 actions and will identify the impacts on vulnerable population of those 10 actions, is that what you're saying that they're proposing? But that-
Broadly speaking, but I don't want to put words in their mouth if they would describe it differently. What I can relay to them is that they are aware, they have been, very interested in wanting to get to this subject, that the expectation of this task force is that this will be a robust discussion as part of the draft plan at the next meeting. I think that's as far as I can go with it tonight without sort of putting words in their mouths about saying things.
I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
good.
and I think the way the state climate task force did this was to, they went through each action and kind of rated it in terms of what impact, so you can actually go back to the state's climate report. And they've identified what their recommendations, which ones had an effect on vulnerable populations. So some of that has been done at the state level. Although we have a much more detailed set of recommendations.
Right, and therein lies the challenge of
Right.
the more detailed, the harder it is to, well, it's good, but it gets harder and it gets to a point of saying, are we actually talking, do we have the resources to be talking with the populations to truly understand the answers to these questions? Or are we giving, fluffy answers to questions that we don't, and I think that's where this becomes more challenging as we get to greater and greater detail. And as I said, I think this will be iterative and will be not ending with this plan.
Yeah, because I think that one of the best examples of measures was people, we need to have more electric cars. And the equity issue with that is they're expensive. There are programs that the state has that helps people who really need transportation, link them up with a used electric car or a used hybrid car. But that's a very small program and you can only address so
And,
much.
I think a lot of that will get built into the implementation plans too. So as we think about what can we do in South Burlington, for example, how do we facilitate all the multifamily housing to get more EV chargers in, then it becomes a really difficult challenge, as several of you pointed out. Those associations most likely to do it are going to be those who have more resources
Yep.
Those who are in apartments, how do we tilt it so that it is allowing folks who live in either apartments or lower income condominium associations to access this same thing? I think that becomes implementation, but the question at this level becomes identifying that the issues exist.
Exactly.
Right.
Darlene has some. I thought she had something.
Are you ready to move on to the next item?
Yeah, Darlene, did you want to chime in on anything there? Or?
No, I'm going to let it go. The state plan didn't do very much about equity. And to answer Andrew's question, the state plan did talk about your second issue, which we don't want to talk about, which is.
I'm not sure we actually, we should answer to that. I think
Yeah.
that's-
But the state plan does in their discussion of,
I know.
and we don't want to go there. Even though our charge references the state plan.
But Darren, do you think we're charged? Do you think we're charged to do that?
I think in the charge, if I recall it right, creating this task force references the Vermont plan. But I don't think anybody thinks we're going to answer that second question. That's way down the road.
Yeah, I think, Darrell, I do recall the council discussion, which led to that being included. And I think that the major driving force was there's a lot of great work that's being done at the state level. Let's make sure to not reinvent the wheel and take advantage of the homework that they have done. That's, I think, principally why it was referenced in there.
Okay, thank you, Darlene.
Schedule?
Schedule.
Okay, so this is the proposed schedule from the Regional Planning Commission as to the items to be addressing in the next few meetings to wrap up. So right now, public engagement, Andrew's letter, July 14th, first draft of the plan presented. Embedded in that is that you'll be receiving the first draft a week in advance of that, and we will be posting it on our website to begin the formal public comment of it's available. Please, look at it, read it. August, not written in here, is around August 10th is when we would be asking for all public feedback to be provided so that you can know when to be hearing it, so the RPC can collect that and bring it to you and say, here's everything that we've heard. August 24th, they would have incorporated, and also you would have a discussion of how do you want to modify things as a result of all the public input. September 8th would be the updated plan for you to choose to take action on to then be able to bring it to council after that
Where's the stuff?
on my computer.
We don't have.
You have it visually in front of you right now, but no, I've not provided it otherwise.
But it's not, this previous schedule needs to be updated.
Correct. And the August date, we were moving that around a little bit. We were finding it was, we wanted to make sure there was enough time for public comment. And then I was out of town for one of the days, and then Melanie was out of town for one of the days. And so our recommendation is this one to both give enough time for public input and for them to incorporate stuff in.
Is anybody out
Which
of
is August,
I mean, like July and August, people are gone.
I mean, I know it's not ideal, but you're trying to deliver the plan in September so that it can be in time for the council to put it into their budgeting, which starts at the end of September. So I realize that that's a challenge, but otherwise you miss an entire budget year, and I don't think you want to do that either. And, I think to Helen's point, the discussion about the plans doesn't end with this is the plan. This is the beginning of talking with all sorts of groups over the next year plus. My takeaway from all the work that you've done, especially the high impact actions, is they're not going to change a whole heck of a lot. reducing vehicle miles traveled, it's eye-opening to all of us, but it's not gonna dramatically change because there's only so many ways to get there.
So between July 14th and August 10th, the public will have an opportunity to provide feedback through the website.
Through the website, the next item on the discussion is to talk about your outreach to the group and whether you would also like to hold a more formal sort of public input meeting.
Okay.
That's up to you as to whether you want to do it, but my next item is to talk with you about the sort of informal
Okay.
outreach approach, which is
Okay.
going and starting to have a bunch of conversations with people.
So the public basically has got about a month in whatever form to provide the feedback by August 10th. Okay.
And Michael, to address your question, I won't be here on the 24th. I'm at an efficiency conference in California, so.
Yeah, I won't be here from August the 14th until September the 16th.
Wow.
That's gonna be tough to meet your schedule then, Michael. Okay, we may have to adjust, but
You won't
Be
be.
in Nova Scotia.
Is anyone else not here on the 24th?
I'm sure I'm here.
Okay,
I will send around a doodle to folks to make sure that you've got hopefully more than just a quorum, because this is, deciding what goes in your final plan, so.
but you won't have more than a quorum because we've already knocked out 3 of 7. So
Okay.
you will have just a quorum or not a quorum?
If you can hold the meetings at noon, then I could
Time
probably join.
difference.
If they were early enough, I might be able to make it. The conference that I'm at goes,
Okay, I'll send,
Otherwise,
we'll continue to work on dates.
yeah. I hear what you're saying, Paul, that we're on a tight schedule, so it's hard to work around vacations, but I don't want you to be surprised by.
Yeah.
So I guess a question that I have for you all is, and you don't have to answer this tonight, but the more advanced notice, the better. Do you feel it would be appropriate, I think this is something that a couple of you brought up, to have a meeting at which you say, we've provided comment, here are some poster boards with the things we would like formally for your public input on this. Do you think that that would be an effective way of getting feedback?
facilitated?
Well, I mean, it's facilitated, I mean,
You mean-
yes, but you've got the things in front, so
You mean here at City Hall?
yes.
I mean, I think it's more effective to go out to where people live.
Right, so we are gonna, that's the next discussion, you are gonna be doing that but that's not a formal thing, it's a lot of informal conversations.
Well, and I
So-
think the advantage of having one session here is that we can only go so many places.
Yeah.
And so either we're asking people who don't have to
Right.
be at one of those places to
Right.
come insert themselves into some other group's social gathering or.
I think we should have one here.
I think so.
Backstop.
I like that idea because I think it kind of puts a stake in the ground and say, look, we've completed this exercise. Here's an opportunity for public engagement. Whoever wants to come, because I'm not exactly sure how all these on-site engagements are going to go. I mean,
I think there are gonna be a lot of individual conversations,
yeah,
not a lot.
exactly. So, but I think having it formally is somewhat ceremonial. And I think it may get a lot more attention, I think. So,
I think it's important.
yeah.
Okay, well then let's do it, and
Yeah.
we'll put it, we'll. I will also doodle it, we'll try to do it in that first week of August, to try to, I know it's not an ideal time for people, but it's when we can do it, so.
Is the city having any of those Thursday night out things?
Next item on the agenda, getting there.
Okay.
Okay, are you ready to move on to the next item?
Mhm.
So, public outreach, so we've been talking about this for a little while. We have, we believe, the materials, I'll talk for a minute first. Based on your last meeting where Melanie and Ann talked about the high impact actions and you got the updated ICLEI information, we feel pretty good that the big punchy points exist. And so when we think about public outreach, and what you talked a little bit about at your last meeting, is the same basic information can shrink and grow to your audience. So how do you talk about it in 2 minutes? How do you talk about it in 20 minutes? How do you have a longer conversation? So, Helen was speaking about after this plan is adopted, each of us and each of the members of the Energy Committee going and finding 3 groups to go make a presentation, a good PowerPoint presentation about what's this all about? What does this mean? What's the next decade look like? That same basic information is also the heart of the plan itself. And that same basic information can be a brief discussion at informal events. We have a schedule of events coming up this summer that our rec department is involved with. And I would love to have you all or whoever's able to attend. We've already got an offer from the Energy Committee as well to table these events. They've got a tent, they've got and things that draw attention. And here are the events that we have scheduled. Whoops, wrong sheet. Darylyn, are you seeing now an Excel sheet that has a bunch of dates on it?
Yes, I am.
Great. So these are the events that we have planned this summer. In addition to that, almost every Wednesday, we have a seniors lunch here at City Hall. I would love to hear about other ones, but Donna, to your question, yes, we have the nights out starting July 7th. It will be the first Sobu night out every Thursday through late August. In addition to that, we have scheduled 3 barbecues in coordination with Champlain Housing Trust to be held at 3 different locations that are sponsored by Champlain Housing Trust. And I'm really excited about these ones because one, it's a targeted audience that is generally not the typically folks that we would be in touch with. These are moderate income folks who I think will be able to get some great feedback at. So there's 3 of those, one at Odell Apartments, which is Farrell Street, one at Limekill Apartments over by St. Mike's, and one that might be past the deadline, the time of the plan, but still may be very worthwhile just starting a conversation right down the street here. There's also going to be a senior barbecue at the end of July at Veterans Memorial. And on one of these nights, I think it's Thursday, the 21st, our rec department called out to us that in addition to Sobu Night Out, it's also going to be a spike ball charity championship event tournament. If you've never played spike ball, it's a somewhat danger-inducing lawn game, but the target audience is sort of 18 to 22-year-olds, which is a neat additional group that doesn't necessarily come to other things. So if we were going to pick one night to try to reach out to a group that's hard to reach for public policy, that might be a neat night.
So there are 5 dates between July 14th and August 10th. July 18th, July 21st, July 28th, July 29th, and August 4th.
Yes.
So there are 5 venues, I guess, for interaction.
6, yes.
They're not there. I was gonna say, what about high school students, but they're not at school.
Right, and we're happy to add others if folks have ideas. These are ones that we'd like to put on the calendar and, ideally get a commitment of at least 2 members of yourselves and or the Energy Committee to be able to just have conversations with folks on these nights.
I'm available for a couple of them, maybe not all of them. Definitely I'm available, yeah.
I tend to go to as many as I can because I live right nearby.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
walk over.
What about homeowners associations? Might not be a decent draw, but you can get a whole neighborhood.
Are there places we can find when they're scheduling?
No, you'd have to get somebody from the homeowners association to present the idea to the board.
Some of them have like monthly meetings. Some of the associations have like quarterly meetings and monthly meetings. It may be like the one association that is big off of Park Street. That's a big, yeah.
Mine has monthly meetings.
Queen City Park has its annual meeting in July.
Yeah.
However, apparently we've gone back to Zoom.
Okay.
So I
Just an idea.
absolutely welcome those, and I would also encourage that in that second category of outreach it doesn't have to be before this plan is done, to have a nice packaged PowerPoint
Sure.
that then everybody in a replicable way can go and talk with homeowners associations, Rotary clubs, fire department, whomever else, book clubs at the library, to be able to repeat this over and over and over and over, because as you talked about at the last meeting, this isn't just about a plan being adopted, it's about building awareness in our community for everything that everybody needs to do, so.
We had a meeting in April or May where we listed a whole bunch of stakeholders in the community, including banks, lending banks, and
Yep.
The South Burlington Business Association, and there's a number of, so I remember having a discussion. I wonder there's a list that was captured.
So will there be some handouts that we give them to take away?
Gosh, Geraldine, it's like you're reading my mind here. So the next thing I've got in front of me is, it's near final, it's not final, but here's a little handout. And I'm gonna bring it up on the screen also.
Nice.
You know, I will say that we do not have, you know, this was not professionally done by graphic designers. We have the RPC lined up to help us with the plan, but their schedule only allowed for that next month. So, you know, understand it's not
all right.
a professional thing, but hopefully it still looks good. And just 1 second here. Let's see. This does not anticipate it being used on Zoom. I'll do my best here and I will send it out as a PDF to folks afterwards. This is going to be a little bit hard to read. I apologize. It's just not the way that this software was designed. So this is a brochure. And it looks sort of backwards in your reading here, but front page, climate action plan, back page, be a climate champion. And here's a few quick things. We talked about this at the last meeting. What are some things that you could do if you're just thinking about it? You know, follow the Energy Committee on Facebook, you know, to see all the great things that they do. If you're thinking about, if you're thinking about a home energy audit, here's the link to go to. If you're thinking about a car, here's the thing to go to. If you're a business, have you thought about reaching out to Efficiency Vermont? And in your community, give us feedback on the plan. This is very rudimentary, but it's trying to get it all sort of in a quick jumpy way. I think the font needs to grow in here, so I apologize, but this tries to say, what are the big things that need to get done? And this is pulling directly from what Melanie and Ann are putting together for your next meeting. Not just what Andrew had in his presentation earlier about weatherize 600 homes, but what's that result in? 5% reduction for doing that piece of it. Electrify, 17% reduction, just getting the data out there in a way that isn't. I don't know if that's- Okay.
So to add, on one of these pages, just like a half of like, why?
Yeah, like why are we doing any of this?
Yeah,
Yes, I totally agree. I think that there's room on that first page or, you know, the top of the second page. Back to your conversation from earlier, do you think it would be more effective for the purposes of this, of individual conversations, to have the why be a global why, or a why be a, you know, did you know that South Burlington or Vermont has 20 more days above freezing than we did 30 years ago? Like,
my strong feeling is about.
is to do both, try to hit something big and something small, because, you know, in 2 sentences, we got to pick something really big.
Something to anchor to Vermont.
Yeah.
Look, these are the few things that we are concerned about, or that you should be concerned about as well.
Okay, I think that there's some data that I
Bring the
recently
global
read,
to the local.
Yeah.
maybe you know this, Ethan, but something about, you know, days above freezing a year have changed, that's been,
That's in my deck, Paul.
okay, like to me, I mean,
Yeah, but
you tell me if
people
you're
don't
wrong,
think
to
of that
me,
as a-
that's something that people can identify with very clearly of,
It is,
oh,
but it
this is
doesn't
different.
Move me at least, that it doesn't move me to do all this. What moves me to do all this is that if we don't, 50% of all species globally are gonna go extinct. Right? I mean, this like having. a few
I was
more days
trying,
of-
I'm trying to answer the question of how do we anchor to Vermont about what does it mean for
Yeah.
you today? In your, well, not you today, you in your lifetime here.
Yeah.
And I agree on the global.
Yeah.
I think we need both.
Yeah, I think some observations, anchoring points about Vermont will be very, very helpful. I think some people are just unaware. You know, there is so much stuff out there. I mean, it's hard to absorb some of this specific detail. There's just so much stuff.
In some ways, it's so weird because there's so many native Vermonters moving to South Carolina
Yeah.
that I just like, so, yeah, they're gonna be perfectly okay with climate change because they don't like it cold.
Well, they're okay with the
You
thermometer
know?
part of it,
And
but
that's,
But if they're on the coast, it's not gonna go so well for them.
well, I know that, but this is the perspective that a lot of people have. You know, I'm not
Right.
saying
Well,
it's my
right, so how do you
perspective.
The outer ring,
Global impacts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think there's a lot of people who don't appreciate global impact.
That's why the why needs to be both.
Right, well,
Yeah, some good statistics about how's rainfall has increased over the last 10 years. What's happened, how many droughts have we had in the
What
last 10 years?
scares people? What scares people? That's what you want. We know what scares people in South
Lyme
Burlington.
disease growing north dramatically.
Lyme disease
Like
is a
that's-
scary thing, but we already have that. The thing that
Right,
really,
it's the
the thing
flood.
that scares people is the thought of thousands of people moving here.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I don't
That's
wanna
what
get into the
scares
speculatory. I think that's where we get into danger
yeah.
of, that very well could happen, but I,
No, but you could say, when there
Unpredictable
are,
weather.
when the coasts flood. And there are 500 million climate refugees looking for homes, Vermont's gonna be impacted.
And, well, and, I mean, it's already here. I mean, and is, if you have a farm, you start to realize that there are no haying windows anymore. That's why I'm looking at it raining outside, because my friend, he hayed a bunch of stuff and it wasn't supposed to rain today.
Yeah.
It's raining a lot more than it used to here, and I don't know if people notice that it gets to 90 degrees in like
So,
one day.
message heard. I would love to get, and I'll send this out to those who are at home. I would love to get any last feedback that you've got, and also would like to get this out like early next week. So if I could ask by like Tuesday, and I know it's a long weekend,
Yeah.
anybody has any comments on this, to get them to me, because I don't want the good to be the enemy of the great in something like this of.
I think the statistic that makes a big impact is that the one that shows the reduction in greenhouse gases for all of the other New England states, and Vermont's is going up. That one, I think.
I think you have to provide more
That's a-
context though.
That, yeah, you need some context
Yeah.
about why has it gone up, because everybody
So
looks at
I
that
think
and like, why has Vermont's, why has Vermont gone up where all the
Yeah.
other states have gone down?
I think the challenge here personally is that a lot of the pushback is gonna be Vermont is the second least populated state in the country. In a world that has countries that are spewing all sorts of stuff, why should we go through all the effort here?
That's
Yeah.
I
true.
think that's the hardest
That is
message
the
to
hard
get.
one.
Well, that's,
Yeah, I agree. Why should we do anything?
Yeah,
Why should we put ourselves
I don't
through?
know we
the-
can address that in this pamphlet.
yeah.
I don't think that's a hard question to address, but not in this pamphlet. I mean,
Well, it is a hard one to
Okay,
address.
well, point taken, that highlight the why.
Yeah.
Got it.
yeah.
So we all send you input and then you decide what you want to incorporate. We'll send you the. input.
Yes, if you're
Okay.
okay with doing
Okay.
it that way, I think,
Sure,
we don't want to
okay.
have.
We won't say, oh, Paul did this.
Okay.
Can I make a suggestion though about
Do
how to get recommendations? So I feel like we're all very close to this and it's very difficult for us to, for me anyway, to read this without like thinking about all the discussions that went into every sentence on here, right? Because this is all very, very familiar to us.
Right.
So I can't read this pamphlet as I want the people who most need to be reached to read it.
Right.
Can I suggest that each of us find at least one person who has nothing to do with this meeting? And ideally, nothing to do with this space, isn't already like a climate champion, because those people, all we have to say is like ring the bell and say climate over here. And they will come over and talk to us, right? Those are easy. So
And
find
I
someone
will
who
try to
doesn't
do
care.
the same thing with some folks. here in the city who communicate with folks, but maybe not on the subject of climate, and say, what in here makes no sense?
Yeah,
What, you know, what just reads like a foreign language?
so
the
what's
way it's being read.
confusing, what grabs you? And then, I mean, you could also just ask them general questions like, what are you concerned about with climate change?
Right.
And find out what should be in here.
Great.
Sounds good.
So I know we're wrapping up. Paul, you had minutes on here. I assume we're gonna kick those to next
We'll
time.
pick
'cause I
to the
don't see
next
it in the
meeting.
packet.
Roseanne has indicated that she did want to make a comment, if that would be okay.
Roseanne, please.
Hi, folks. So not that I wasn't paying rapt attention while you were in your meeting, but I was looking at 7 days this week, and I don't know if any of you have yet seen it, but I really urge you to read the article. It's called Fuel for Thought. Vermont is racing to build housing, often with fossil fuel heating systems. And it addresses a lot of what you were talking about early this evening, and it gives two examples of a housing development that is using super efficient heat pumps, and another housing development a few miles away in Colchester by the Champlain Housing Trust that's building affordable units, but they're using gas because it's cheaper. And they're quoting the developer or the Champlain Housing Trust saying, our job is to build housing. We're sorry, but fossil fuel is cheaper. And there's more in here. And it also cites, just in case you're interested, that California alone has 57 cities and counties with some local prohibition on new fossil fuel buildings. And of course, it mentions Burlington too. But it's a rather short, relatively short article, but it hits to, I think, some of the pushback you're going to get from the affordable housing contingent, that we need affordable housing as fast as possible. And that means, and they talk about, we know how to do gas furnaces, and that's what we're doing because it's cheaper now. And that's what our mission is. By the way, a counter argument, as you'll read this, you'll find out, is that if you don't have gas furnaces in it, it frees up space for more units. In fact, they could get 2 more units in a house if they didn't use the gas furnaces. Anyway, I really encourage you to read. It's in this week's 7 days.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'll send the link around. I already pulled it up on the website, so everyone will have it.
This is we'll all be living in.
Well, so much for my leaving early.
Yeah.
My friends didn't believe me that I'd actually walk out at 8 p.m. and join them. So they changed it.
Well, we're glad we had you with us.
Oh, oh, no. It's all right. I'll be in the room next time.
Hopefully you didn't miss a good dinner.
I did, actually.
Oh, okay.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.